All right, I will bring, sorry. I normally have it. I'll bring the February 28th, 2023 Board of Education study session to order. Roll call.
Kate Thomas,
Here.
Troy Carr,
Here.
Deb Baker.
Here.
Clay Cologne,
Here.
Jamie Clapham,
Here.
Jim Hansen is absent with notice, and Michael Berkland.
Here.
All right, please join us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I need a motion for the approval of the agenda.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, items up for discussion. We have Nicole Swaggart and Brett Garland for the school safety.
I'll share it, Shirley. Thank you. Yeah, no, I want you to.
Thank you, President Thomas. I'm excited to be here tonight. One of the very first requests the board made of me, I think this might have even come up in my interview. One of the very first things was school safety. And that is a huge process, a huge ask in our district because we have 23 school buildings that have students in it every single day. And so, although, I have 34 years in the district, I don't have all of the expertise that would really make me the best person to determine school safety. So luckily in the state of South Dakota, we have the South Dakota Safety Center. So this is Brett Garland. He is joining me tonight. Brett Garland is the director of the South Dakota Safety Center. Actually, I'm very fortunate. I met Mr. Garland a few years ago when I had my identity stolen and I had racked up a whole bunch. I hadn't, whoever stole my identity had racked up a whole bunch of bills in my name. And I was really frustrated because I discovered then that if you have your identity stolen, you are the victim. And I lived in South Dakota, but all the identity theft happened in California. And the people in California who actually lost products, lost cars, lost money, they're not the victim. I'm the victim in South Dakota. And it's really interesting how that all plays out. But basically, for that to be prosecuted, South Dakota would have to extradite whoever did it in California back to South Dakota. And there was no real loss here in South Dakota. So it got really complicated. And I'm not one to just take, oh, it's complicated and I'm okay, I'm going to walk away from it. I'm one to kind of dig in. And in my digging in, I found Mr. Garland when he worked for the DCI, Department of Criminal Investigations, and he was nice enough to entertain me for an hour or so one afternoon and kind of walk me through that process. And so I guess a professional friendship was born that day. And so when I called him up in the summer and said, listen, I would very much like it if I could ask all of our principals in Rhapsody area schools to reach out to you and do some school safety assessments, which he very graciously did as principals reached out, and I'm very thankful for that. Would you like to talk at all about how that goes when they call you up and ask you to come?
Certainly. So when schools reach out to our office and ask for us to do a site security assessment, they reach out to me. And so we were really fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to meet with all the principals in all 23 buildings and other staff as well, and perform what we refer to, I guess, with the School Safety Center as a site security assessment. And I can discuss that process if you'd like me to.
A little bit, yeah. that'd be
So
great.
the process that we've kind of settled on.
Can
at
you
this
make sure
point-
your mic is turned on, or is it? Meet up closer. Okay, sorry. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So the process that we settle on, that I use, is somewhat of a twofold process. We use a model that first was introduced by the Department of Homeland Security as a best practices model for school safety. And with that, it allows me to first at least sit down with the school administrator and their team that they've assembled to go through the assessment. We identify 7 different security categories. We ask 58 questions in those security categories, and then we evaluate based on where they rank, either from very low or up to very high within each of those 58 questions. And then through that, we provide an option for consideration for each of those 58 questions. So with that, you will get a document that will be roughly 38 to 40 pages long. It's a PDF that will list each of those 7 security categories, each of those questions that I ask in those security categories from the Homeland Security DHS K through 12 school security assessment. And then an option for consideration for each of those questions. And with that, there will be links to resources too that the schools can look at and refer to maybe help them, make decisions from that point on. What I like about that model is it allows me to do just that, sit down with each of the school administrators and their team, discuss school safety, but also allow me to ramble on a little bit to talk about the resources our office has to offer as it relates to school resources and school safety. And these are resources that are provided through DOJ grant funds that the state has acquired to provide schools for free throughout the state in a lot of these different areas. Once we're able to do that, we do the walkthrough of the facility and really get more specific with the school. And then I'm able to then craft what I guess is a written report that we design based on principles of crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED principles, where we're able to assess really 3 specific areas, but we'll go into more than that. But as it relates to your natural surveillance, to the school's access management and their territoriality, and we'll get real specific with the schools based on that report. So they're going to get 2 really robust sets of documents that they can refer to and help them when it comes time to make decisions and prioritize their needs.
So the documents that Mr. Garland is talking about, I have put in a Google Share Drive and I sent you that link today. So you have the link to all 22 buildings, and there's 2 documents for each building. And as he said, one document is 30 to 40 pages long and another document is 19 pages long. So we probably could have had a study session on every single building, but that would have taken up every study session for the entire year. So I'm going to try to condense them, but if you have any buildings that in particular you would like to talk about with me in the future, or you want to dive into those documents and ask me any questions, I will be happy to answer them. So why is school safety and security super important? Well, to me, it's important because the very first year I taught full-time in Rapid City area schools was 1991. Obviously, school starts the end of August. on September 11th, 1991, there was a hostage situation at Stevens High School. That hostage situation was directly above my classroom. And what I will tell you about that scenario is in 1991, we really didn't have a plan. And in a lot of ways, it was very chaotic and we didn't know what to do. I can remember teachers being outside, they didn't have keys, purses, 1991 before cell phones. So that, that was a different issue then. And it was very terrifying. And I can remember thinking, do I want to be a teacher? Well, we have a lot of teachers asking themselves that very question these days. Luckily for me, I taught in Rapid City area schools, and Rapid City area schools immediately responded. So immediately after that, we went to work creating safety plans. And I would say that we were really at the cutting edge of having safety plans in place. So that's why it's important to me. Mr. Garland works with the South Dakota School Safety Center. There's some information for that. You can read about him and the Safety Center on this slide, but also in the packet that I gave you. As he was saying, it's Department of Justice,
the South Dakota School Safety Center is under the direction of the Department of Public Safety, Office of Homeland Security here in South Dakota.
And that allows that all of this work that he did for us was free to us. We didn't have to pay for this. It is part of that grant that the state is using for school safety. And it is a huge gift because if we had to employ somebody to come in and do a safety assessment of all the buildings, it would have cost us a chunk of change, but we got Mr. Garland to do it for free. The South Dakota Safety Center has a lot of great things on their webpage. So I would encourage parents and board members to go visit that webpage. I put in links into this PowerPoint. I know Shirley will post it in the agenda after the meeting tonight. One of the things that the South Dakota Safety Center has is this Safe to Say. And Safe to Say is a thing that they launched this fall, late this fall.
Right around October 1st.
And it allows messages, so someone can type a message if they have if they have a worry or a concern or that they think there's a threat. They can text messages in. School safety often really comes down to who knows what when, and we need them to share it. And lots of times with youth, it is the fear of sharing that makes us not find out in society until too late. This Safe to Say removes that fear of telling somebody because it's totally anonymous, and it allows that information to get out to the office, and then they can react to that and share it with the schools. So there's a lot of great things there. That Safe to Say is really fantastic. This is what their page looks like. There's a click to submit a tip, or you can submit a tip by calling. Is that a text as well?
So there's three mechanisms to report concerning or threatening behavior. One is through the website, safetosay.sd.gov, or through the free mobile app, Safe to Say South Dakota, or through the toll-free number 1-844-3-SD-SAFE. And tipsters, like Superintendent Swigert had discussed, are able to submit tips or report those threatening or concerning behaviors in an anonymous fashion. Those tips automatically go to a 24/7 answering point, which is our state radio dispatch. Trained first responder communicators who are able to receive that tip, communicate with that tipster, and deliver the tip accordingly. If it's a threat to life, they can automatically and immediately dispatch it and send it to a first responder agency like a law enforcement agency. And these tips can also be delivered to the point of contact to each of the schools that we have here in South Dakota.
So I don't know if you caught it. When we first talked in August, probably when we first talked, the app hadn't been launched yet, but it has been launched now.
It has been, yes.
So there's an app that students can download on the phone. Parents can ask students to download. It allows them to report things on an app, or they can go to this website and click to share a tip, or they can call this toll-free number. I'm really thankful that South Dakota has stepped into the future with recognizing the need to have these types of abilities for students to report and parents when they hear something as well. Another area that South Dakota Safe Schools is looking at is mental and behavioral health, because when we track school violence, there is almost always a link back to mental or behavioral health issues. So they have some resources there on the page. They have the mental health first aid, the adverse childhood experiences, Handle with Care, which is something our board supports. We have gone through that before, but that is when law enforcement reports to the school district a name of a student who has had contact with law enforcement. We don't know any of the details. And the message goes out to the school where that student is to handle that student with care the next day, because there was probably some traumatic experience with law enforcement or some situation the night before. The school is not to ask the student about that. We're not to question them, pull them into the office. We are just to know that we should be on our best watch that day, making sure that student gets what they need in school. Suicide prevention, bullying, and internet safety, all of those things. And, you know, we're trying again to reschedule our internet safety. We seem to be facing a curse with having Holly Strand come in and talk to us about internet safety, but that bullying piece and that internet safety, those are two things that I think parents are highly concerned about. We hear a lot in my office about perceived bullying. Parents, children contact me, reach out to myself or Mr. Talley's office to discuss that. And we have a lot of concern in our community about what children can find on the internet. And we encourage parents to be safe in that. The South Dakota Safety Center also has a variety of training opportunities. Would you like to speak to any of those at all?
Well, the training opportunities that we provide, one of the biggest programs that we're really grateful to be able to provide is our partnership that we've developed with Dr. Dewey Cornell from the University of Virginia, who has established what is considered the only evidence-based model in behavioral threat assessment, and that is his comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines model, or CSTAG. We are able, with the grant funds that we have been awarded, to be able to provide that to all our K through 12s in the state for free. There are two levels to that training. There's a level 1 training, which is all online, which school teams can take at their own individual pace. And we encourage schools to put together their team the way they see fit. Typical teams will consist of an administrator or administrators to lead and guide that team. We like a mental health professional to be on that team, whether that's a counselor, a school psychologist, a social worker, a special education director. We like those individuals to be on the team. We like a law enforcement presence to be on that team. Sometimes there are school nurses, there are teachers, there are coaches. We don't discourage schools in the state in any way to put the team together that they see fit. Your schools know your schools better than I do, better than Dr. Cornell does. We want you to put your team together the way you see fit. We are able to support that and to support that training. So that first level 1 training, again, is all online. It's roughly 4 to 6 hours. We do provide 6 hours of continuing education units to the Department of Ed for that training. There is a second training to that, which is live virtual training, where Dr. Cornell's staff will provide these teams live virtual training where they're able to interact with Dr. Cornell's staff, discuss and interact in case studies, case examples, expand on that training, and really put that evidence-based model to really good use. That's 4 extra hours that we'll provide CEUs for through the Department of Ed. And it's really a popular training program that we're able to provide to the state of South Dakota and have had tremendous feedback from that. If school safety coordinators, counterparts of mine throughout the country will tell you that one of the first things that they would certainly recommend all schools participate in is develop a behavioral threat assessment team, train in a behavioral threat assessment model, and have the ability to identify threats, evaluate those threats, and then provide the right interventions moving forward. And that's what this training, we certainly believe, does for our K through 12s. That's one of the trainings we provide. Our school safety specialist provides training in youth mental health first aid, ACEs, handle with care, soon youth mental health first aid for teens. We also provide training and resources in what Superintendent Swaggart had already discussed in internet safety, resources in bullying prevention, suicide prevention. And we're continuing to expand that training by partnering with our office at the Department of Public Safety and the grant funds that we are awarded to support schools in the state with National Association of School Resource Officer basic training, for example, or ALICE training, which I know the Rapid City School District is a big proponent of, and so are we. And so in other efforts like that throughout the state, we want to be able to provide all things school safety, in our offices is certainly growing and being able to do that.
So one of the things that I would like to thank the board again for is next year and the next 2 years in our calendar, we actually have the floating professional development days. And we could utilize some of that time for a team to take these courses and get credit for doing that and then get their floating PD day. So you have opened, by allowing us to put those into our calendar, you have allowed us to create time where we can build in some training like this for our staff. So 22, as of yesterday, 22 of the 23 buildings had done the assessment with Mr. Garland. Today, the final school did theirs. So I'll be getting you that information once he has had time to do that. So I do have a slide for every single building. What I will tell you is my team down here, we have worked really hard for the last week or so to try to condense those 60 pages of information that Mr. Garland compiled for each building down into kind of a little snapshot slide. I've included the summaries and I've included the big report that Mr. Garland sent. So you can kind of see here are the kind of the go-tos, and I've just done them in alphabetical order. I'm going to cover the first two kind of more in depth, then they become kind of repetitive. So I'll go through them a little bit more quickly after that. Okay. I was very careful about what I put in here. I tried to.
Awesome. Just wanted to make sure.
So Mr. Garland was telling me that this is, protected critical information. I tried to be really careful about what I included in this. But overall, one of the messages I want to send is that Mr. Garland communicated to the buildings and to myself that he was impressed with our safety plans, our buildings, the plans, the practice, the ALICE training, and all of that. That is not to say that we don't have some things that we could improve on. Safety improvements, I think, have been a priority for this board. School safety improvements moving forward. We have some additional asks that will come at the end of this. It's vital that we continue to pay attention and continue to always keep our buildings incredibly safe. So the things I noticed in many of our buildings were, we looked at some areas like an action plan. Every single building in Rapid City area schools is required to have a safety action plan. We also Mr. Garland also looked at the grounds, the area around the building, and in many cases made suggestions about things like barriers, speed bumps, better signage, better walkways. All of those things help. In many of the buildings, he looked at the pickup and drop off areas. If you are around any of our schools at drop off or pickup time, you will notice that some are better than others, but even our newest elementaries, I'm thinking Valley View, Corral Drive, best laid plans often mean we have to redo it a couple of years later because we figure out that that was not the best laid plan for traffic. Traffic around all these schools is always a consideration. Also, we've talked a lot in the past about the how old some of our buildings are and how they were designed 70 years ago on a street versus how we design schools now for pickup and drop off is incredibly different. And I would have you think about Wilson for a second. Wilson versus even a Pinedale where there is a area to get the buses off the street versus Wilson where our buses pick up directly on the street because there is no pull-off area and parking lots and traffic around a building. So that's a concern in many of our buildings. Things that was suggested for every single building, because we don't have this in any of our buildings, was fencing around the area. That fencing is expensive and it does limit the access of the public to our property. But it is something to look forward when we look forward. Do we want non-scalable fences? Do we want pedestrian gates with a bar, push bar to get out? Those are things to consider. Do we want to put in or work with the city and put in speed bumps? Do we want to put in barriers? I remember in 1995 with the Oklahoma City bombing that happened in April of 1995. That resulted in barriers being placed in front of all of our federal buildings. Barriers don't historically exist in our schools, but maybe that is something that we need to talk about. One of the things that Mr. Garland brought forward was that speeding cars and not having access to our buildings. Some of the things that I think was very, very, very important, and this really is something that schools need to work on, but families need to work on as well. If you look at the area that is awareness on almost every single page, the awareness piece is reminding students and teachers and staff and parents that everybody needs to use the main door. Just last week or the week before last, we had a secure lockdown at one of our elementary buildings because a parent came up to a side door, knocked on the door until a student let them in. Somebody saw a stranger coming in the building. The whole building went on lockdown. The parent was trying to get to a student's classroom. There was a stranger in the building, didn't go through the office. So the building went on lockdown. So not propping doors open, not letting strangers indoors, even if it's not a stranger, not letting somebody in a door they're not supposed to enter in. I think it is especially hard at middle schools and high schools because I've been at all of them. But if a student comes up and knocks on a door, somebody will come by and push it open and let them in. It is a big, huge safety concern. Not letting in strangers or adults, using all of that security measure all of the time, because what happens is, I'll just do this once. We don't know what that one time might result in. The other thing that came up is we have for years asked teachers to lock and prop their doors or lock their doors and shut them. And many people find that an inconvenience because if a student needs to go to the bathroom, then the door's locked, somebody has to go to the door and let them in. But many of our doors lock only from the outside. And so when I started, Bishop Carr and I had a conversation about Uvalde and a teacher literally having to have a plan to have what a student would do if she went outside and locked the door. What the students would do if something happened to her, pulling the door shut. I mean, it's a terrifying thing. We do need to look at what the cost would be to change all of our door locks, all of our door handles into ones that lock from the inside, so a teacher wouldn't have to go outside, but we also have to train all of our staff to always keep their doors locked and have their key with them so that they can get back in. So there is a page for every single building in the district, and I will also to the board send out this PowerPoint to you. It has concerns, action plans, grounds, pickup, drop off, exterior things. Like I said, they'll be pretty repetitive. The door locks come up a lot. Also, another thing that comes up is covering the windows, having a one-way so you can see out, but people can't see in to the door or to the windows. That came up a whole bunch. Windows are a wonderful thing. In fact, we don't want to have school classrooms without windows, but those windows on the first floor become an issue. And especially because they can be just wide open and everybody can see in and see out. So a consideration that came up a lot was, do we put something on the doors? Also, many of our doors in our older buildings, the classroom doors literally have windows in them, windows that are big enough for someone to break and crawl through. So having security film on those at the very least, if not replacing those doors entirely. With 23 buildings, that is a huge, even changing the door handles is a huge expense. Those are things to consider. Anything?
Nope.
We're good? Okay. So when you look at Corral Drive, one of the things at Corral Drive was the ground floor windows. Like I said, many of the buildings had concerns about the drop off and pickup times, students letting people in or out. Entrances, they're a really tricky thing for schools, right? Because I think at one point we counted the doors at Stevens High School and there was like 130 some doorways. And even the gym at Stevens High School has like 15 doors to get into the gym. We've changed a lot since that building was built. And if we built a gym today, like when we built Central High School's new activities area, there is literally a safety vestibule.
Yes.
And that was encouraged a lot in a lot of the reports with Mr. Garland, where you could have one of the doors open and then you have a kind of a gathering area and then you can have another door open and you can kind of control the pace. But we've shrunk the number of doors we put into a space way down. At our high schools, especially Stevens High School, where the gym is in a whole nother building, or when the classes may be, well, when I was there, it was the freshman wing, but juniors and seniors might have classes over there. They will go outside from the fine arts area or the art wing over to the freshman wing, or they go outside over to the gym. So on our schedule, on our passing periods, we have to have those doors open for kids to come in. Ideally, there'd always be an adult with them, right? But there's 1,700 kids moving around at Stevens High School during the passing periods. So there's not an adult at every doorway. And those are concerns. Those are safety concerns. I don't think we'd probably ever build a building in the design that we have Stevens High School where there's a gym totally separate from the main building, but we work with what we've got. The fencing areas came up about a lot on Grandview. One of the things that that was noted was we've even had stray animals wander onto our playgrounds, and that is another thing that a fence could help with. You know, just a couple weeks ago, I reported that I'd met with Game Fish and Parks and we came up with a wild animal plan. A couple of years ago, there was a mountain lion sighting, hopped the fence hopped into the Grandview playground. Most recently, there was one out in the Rapid Valley area. Those are considerations, but it's a big wide open space that looks pretty inviting, I think, even to animals. Many of our buildings we have camera systems in all of our buildings, but our older buildings, just kind of the layouts is not always safe or always the best with the camera layout due to the sun or when we put in the cameras. So that always needs to be something that we're using capital outlay for to constantly keep up with the technology. Last summer, we put new cameras in to Stevens and Central and Rapid City High School. It's always a big cost, but it's always incredibly important. But it's not just the cost for the equipment. I know that Mr. Daniels came in and talked about, we also then had to buy a bigger server that could house the information coming in from these better cameras. And the servers didn't come in. We had the cameras installed, but we didn't have the servers in at the right time. So we were sending the central cameras to the North Middle School server that was big enough to house it and then sending that information back. So there's so many layers on this, and that all comes out of capital outlay. So I want us to remember that when we talk about being asked, what have we done with our capital outlay money? Why haven't we built buildings? Capital outlay does so much more than just build buildings. It buys curriculum. It also buys all this safety equipment that we need. That all comes out of capital outlay. So Horace Mann is one of our older buildings. The pick up and drop off at Horace Mann is an issue because it's one of the ones that's right on the street. One of the things I thought was interesting, a recommendation from the safety center was that we install more lights, but a lower wattage. So it's a same amount of energy being used, but we have more lights all around. And I think that's a good consideration to have, especially in isolated areas. Knollwood Elementary. I wanted to point out that Knollwood Elementary is a very safe school. That property over there, and the building and the way it is designed, it is a school that we have not had safety issues at. And I wanted to point that out tonight. It is a large building that has fewer students in it right now, just based on population in that area of town. So we have a lot of space in there. It is a big building. So one of the things that was suggested is possibly adding more radios into teachers' hands. We are looking at shifting to a different internet or a different mobile phone carrier. And some mobile phones that we're looking at actually have the radios built into the phones for faculty, for staff, right into the phone. So it's not the big, heavy radio. It'd be like carrying a cell phone around, which Coy and I have met quite a few times with the company that is offering those. And we think, especially in our buildings that are large and our buildings that need a lot of, like our teachers going out on playground duty could have these with them. So that's something that we're looking at. Meadowbrook. Meadowbrook, we have quite a bit of land over there in that area, which does allow us a chance maybe to expand in the future. But even though Meadowbrook is an older school, it was really designed well because the drop pickup and drop off area and the parking lot is really able to take that traffic off the street and kind of move it to the side. And I did want to point that out. It is in a residential area, but it was designed wisely. So, you know, when we get hopefully ready to build some schools in the future, we can look at some old designs that have really worked for us. Pinedale would be another building that has some off-street parking. We did invest in some parking lots over at Pinedale. But another strange thing about Pinedale is we park people on the playground. That the part of the playground is literally a parking lot at Pinedale, which does get into that area of is that incredibly safe? Should we be fencing off that playground area? So as I said, there is a slide for every single school. South Park is the one school that I don't have a slide for at this time. That school did not complete the assessment until today, so that will be coming. Wilson is one of our oldest buildings. So if you would like to go to the end of the elementary schools and look at Woodrow Wilson Elementary, it has a lot of writing on that slide. And part of that is truly based on the age of the building. The fire escapes, the age of the doors and the windows, how it is set on that lot. But additionally, we have a lot of concerns with safety at Wilson because of its proximity to the park there. And some of the homeless population in Rapid City spend a lot of time in that park area. And we also share part of that park with the city. So the courts there, the tennis, I don't know if it's tennis courts. Is it actually tennis courts? The courts there, we can use them if nobody is using them for the city. But if somebody is playing tennis on them, we don't use them. Because that building is old, it has in the spring and in the fall, when the weather is super hot, those rooms get really warm, and teachers do try to utilize time out in the park. One of the things that was encouraged by the safety center is that we need to make sure that we have a real safe use park plan if we're gonna use that space. And because we know what's happening in that park, we need to make sure that that playground is safe every day for kids. Middle school has different considerations because the age of the kids gets to be a little bit older. We do have still that issue with the doors, letting people indoors. Hallways become more of an issue with middle schools because middle school hallways, corridors, that is where some fighting situations can happen. It really kind of begins at that. So making sure we have camera coverage throughout those buildings to ensure response and safety. Making sure that our staff is doing hall duty, kind of keeping an eye about what's happening in the hallway. So the camera systems. And I'll point out that East is one of our newest middle schools, and it still could use a camera update. So that's how fast technology is always changing for us. Hallway intersections in middle schools are super busy because students are going lots of different directions. So it can be really challenging for somebody who is watching the cameras to see what's happening immediately. That's why that presence of adults in the hallways is so important. I did want to point out at North, we've invested a lot of money in kind of redesigning that front entrance of North. The board put a lot of money in that, and that redesign has really helped with the traffic patterns drop off and pickup. It has also allowed us to upgrade some other areas of that building, doorways and stuff, but we still need to be concentrating on things that we need to fix and improve in all of our buildings, safety wise. It was interesting to read the report on South because he's doing a safety report for South Middle School. And we're building a new South Middle School. So as I was reading Mr. Garland's report, he was saying, you know, the school right now has this need, but the future design is designed better for parking, pickup and drop off. And I appreciated the ability to recognize in his report that we have change coming to that old building. The high schools, I talked a little bit about Stevens earlier. Central is also covered here. Same kind of teenage adult considerations there. Lots of doors. Central also has lots of doors. We have that space behind Central that's right off of the Commons area that students like to go out and use. That is kind of walking distance from the creek, walking distance. We're really close to the Civic Center. We also have to be concerned and aware about our homeless population that can be down along those areas as well. It is also very, very close to an interstate interchange right there. So those are things traffic wise that we have to be aware of in that area. Adult supervision. I would say that the board has also invested a lot of energy and time and money into improvements at Central High School. When I started with the district 34 years ago, I subbed for a whole semester at Central High School when we didn't even have full walls. It was quite interesting to teach with partial walls and hear all of the information that was going on. But I think taking that open space and creating classrooms was also a nod to safety in those areas. Rapid City High School, part of the reason we invested so much money into that redesign at Rapid City High School was we added that office entrance area and that stairways, because the original Central High School's office was on the second floor, which is not a design that we would ever have now, right? But historically, when you went into Central High School, you'd go in the front doors and up and then down the hall, and that's where the office was. So investing in using that building going forward, which that building's going to be 100 years old this year, meant that we needed to build that additional classroom space and that office space off, if you're looking at Rapid City High School, off to the right. And the hallway, the stairway, the windows, although beautiful, I think Mr. Garland would say all of those windows might be a little bit of a safety concern. But that building is really confusing because the main entrance is now off to the right, but the middle entrance says Rapid City High School above it. When my office was there, I can't tell you the number of times people would come to the middle doors. They're the old doors. We'd have to talk to them on the intercom and tell them to come down to the other part of the building. But those middle doors at Rapid City High School are where the students let in people all the time. And it doesn't matter how many times we talk to them, they're still letting students in those doors, people in those doors, complete strangers looking for theater tickets in those doors. And that's a safety thing that comes down to the individual student who's standing there letting people in. So some other considerations that I think we need to have moving forward. Lots of districts around the nation have hired a school safety coordinator, somebody who actually is on the payroll in districts doing things like being a liaison between the law enforcement and the schools, assisting with law enforcement services, conducting safety evaluations, identifying and assisting the director in reducing physical security concerns, analyzing and evaluating patterns of safety concerns on school property, working with the board to determine where they want to put the money. Do we want to put it in more cameras? Do we want to put it in door locks? Doing a statistical analysis of reports of situations happening on our campuses, developing new programs, communication plans, working with the community relations manager to get information out, and coordinating and writing grants for school safety. So that is something that I want to bring forward as a consideration. Another thing that we would like to maybe bring forward to board for future consideration is having some security gates as a pilot at a couple of our buildings next year. We're wondering if there's two different companies. One is called Open Gate. They are a single station cost, so that's 2 units that have, I think it's a kind of a magnet thing. It's kind of like what we walk through, not quite as significant as at the airport or at the courthouse, but it detects weapons of mass destruction. There it says, so guns, large knives, anything like that. The cost with Open Gate is $16,400 for a pair with a test kit and shipping and training. So each set costs $19,395. Central would need 2 or 3 sets of these. North would need 2 sets. The other company that has this technology is a monthly cost. They don't just sell you the device like Open Gate does. It's a monthly cost, and it is $90,000 for a 4-year contract for each device, but they maintain them. I did put a link in, so when you get the PowerPoint, you can click on that link. This is an article that talks about the good, the bad, and the ugly with these things, because they are not the end-all solution. We are a 1-to-1 school district with computers, so we'd have to figure out the settings and if every student needs to take their computer out and set it on the table. The higher the setting, the more sensitive it is, the more you're going to have false positives. And the staffing at these buildings to ensure that every positive reading had a reaction to it is something to consider. On the other hand, we live in a city, in an area with a population that is growing daily. And we do recognize that we have that we have gangs and drug problems in our community. And we need to be prepared to have a reaction to those facts that we live with. And so I wanted to present this as it might be something that Assistant Superintendent Mr. Talley wants to bring forward as a pilot. So rushing through all of that, do you have any questions that you would like to ask?
I had a
Jamie,
couple of questions. One, is there like a standard? Like we have student to teacher ratio. Is there like a standard as far as safety when you're talking about like the ideal staff to student ratio you'd have in an elementary school or a middle school? Like, cause I know a lot of times we talk about doors and access, like it's a people thing, and not saying that I am like proposing we go hire all these people, but just a question if that's if there is some standard that is ideal.
I'm not aware of one.
And then my other thought was when we talk about doors and are the age of our buildings and the wiring electricity, are they a barrier to having more fob entries? Because I know a couple schools, and when I were out at Rapid Valley, they were saying we'd like a fob, but then it has to be wired. And so is that kind of a barrier to having more electric entry doors?
It's not just as easy as calling an electrician out and making it happen. It's an investment. I think that one of the buildings, the older the building is, like Wilson, we have power issues in Wilson all of the time. You plug in something and something else dims. I mean, that building, the electricity in that building is an issue every single day. I have not heard that the electricity, the wiring is an issue at Rapid Valley, but I wouldn't be surprised that, you know, when we built buildings, we didn't think of all the devices we were going to be plugging in 30 years later. And so we don't have enough plugins. We don't have enough wiring. It can be done. I mean, just think about what Governor Janklow did many years ago with wiring all of our buildings for internet and Wi-Fi. It absolutely can be done. I was in the building when they had people coming in and wiring Stevens High School. It can be done. It's a big project that took a lot of effort, and that would be a continued big expense for the district.
When we're talking about key fobbing doors. So our office with the Office of Homeland Security of South Dakota, we're awarded grant funds that we are able to disseminate to first responders into schools every year. And one of our biggest asks that we get from schools are to key fob doors. And to key fob a single door can range anywhere from $3,500 per door up to almost $11,000 per door. So the average price that we might see is probably right around $4,500 per door. So when we make those recommendations, yeah, it would be great to key fob every door. We make that knowing that the expense is usually the biggest hurdle that school districts have to cross. But it is certainly the safest mechanism that we know of to secure our exterior doors.
And the wonderful, great thing about key fobs is they can be mass controlled. So you can turn everybody's key fob off, or you can, you know, if somebody loses their fob, it's not like losing a hard key, but the expense is there. Bishop Carr?
Any more? Go ahead.
I want to first thank you, Superintendent Swaggart, for taking on this project. I'm very sensitive about safety, and it starts as a pastor. Obviously, everyone knows a couple of years ago all the church shootings, and so we did this similar thing and made some corrective actions. And so when coming on the school board, obviously, again, at that time, there were school shootings and all kind of things going on. So thank you for taking on this project. My first question is just kind of a curious question. Is our district on the cutting edge of not being concerned about safety, but actually doing something, having you come in your department, Mr. Garland, or are we kind of behind or in the middle, or where we at?
No, I would, if I could say this, I was extremely grateful, number one, for the opportunity when Superintendent Swaggart reached out to do this, because this is where my office is. My kids grew up in this area. I live in this area. So I got a vested interest, obviously, personally, even though my kids are in the Meade district. This is still home to me.
Sure.
I would say this, that each and every one of the 23 schools that I visited and each of the individuals that I met with at all of these schools had an extreme vested interest in school safety and school security and keeping their kids safe. They, better than me, having been in the education business for as long as they have, recognize that kids aren't really safe, staff aren't really safe if they don't feel safe. And in order to do that, they wanted to do what was best and incorporate some of the options for consideration that we have planned. If you notice, and you have the opportunity to go through each and every one of the 23 assessments, the DHS K through 12 school security measures that we put together, you'll see that the Rapid schools assess very well, extremely well. Doesn't mean that there aren't certainly areas that we could help or that could use some help, especially with our older buildings. But I was extremely grateful for not only those conversations, but also the recognition that, you know, most of the recommendations that we make aren't, or options for consideration that we make aren't big ticket spending items that we say that you should do. Most of it is doing what Rapid really does well. And that is build relationships with their community members, build relationships with their other stakeholders, to include their SROs and their school counselors and in the other agencies that can help in that regard, because they recognize that that is an important facet of keeping kids safe. So to answer your question, I know I get windy. Yeah, you should be happy in the direction that Rapid School District is going when it comes to school safety, because I know I appreciated it. I've been in 132 schools across the state since this office has opened up. And I would certainly say that the Rapid schools in this district are certainly moving forward in that right direction to do what is right. And I'm grateful for that.
Thank you for that. I really do hope also that we take advantage of the training opportunities that you talked about, because one of the things, and it's also CYA type of thing, because God forbid anything happen, I want to be able to look a parent in the eye and said, we did this, we do this training, anything that we could have done to have prevented it, being proactive, that we have done. So I don't know, I know, Swagger, you talked about the training time. So I mean the
Flex time. The
whatever
floating
it's
days,
called.
the floating days, yes.
that actually that we take it, especially when I hear anything free, when me or my wife hear anything free, I'm about it. So it would be, you know, it'd be great that if we took advantage of that. My other thing is, is there anybody already in charge or somebody gonna be in charge of the overall safety program to make sure that we don't have this nice presentation, but there's continued follow-up and monitoring of how we're doing at each building?
So buildings and grounds, John Lundgren takes on the school safety piece. He's also the person called, has always been the person called when there's a break-in or anything. He goes to the building just a couple weeks ago. I know that the PD had it on their Facebook page, but we had a person break into one of our elementary schools. He was there in the middle of the night, working with his crew to get that building shored up. He is also the person who puts in for the capital outlay requests with the principals, works on that to do the school safety improvements.
Okay.
So we are covered. He also has many highly qualified people under him, including we have electricians who work for our district and can do some of that work for us.
Mr. Gardner, last question, just as a concept, where are you with security gates? And the reason why I asked that question, because in our discussion of them, we were thinking that it could be a hot button issue with the community, especially where we want to pilot them. So what would be your advice on are they worth it? Are they?
Certainly, anytime you have the opportunity to enhance the safety of your school through technology and through barriers like that were discussed is certainly a benefit.
Okay.
What you'll see in the documentation that I wrote, and I guarantee I wrote it in all 23 written reports, is that we certainly encourage the schools to educate their families and their parents about those school safety measures. So they know, you're going to get a parent that, I don't like that this door, for example, is always locked and I can't get in. Well, you have those conversations up front, you're going to get buy-in most of the time from these families and these parents, and they recognize you're doing what you can to keep their kids safe. So if you present it in a way that the aesthetics of it might oftentimes seem a little bit over the top to some people. We recognize that, but when we educate our parents and our families that we're doing what we can to keep schools safe, to keep your kids safe, you're going to get buy-in from those families, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Mrs. Baker.
Thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
This is an amazing task, I would assume. I just have a question. I'm just kind of curious, is there grants for the fencing and for the changing out the doors and the locks and stuff? Are there available grants?
There are. So what I try to do with each and every one of the principals that I met with or the teams that I met with is I sent them an email after our meeting where, you know, for example, our office put together a best practices school safety guide where your district has the opportunity to go through that document and say, we're good with ours, and you do have a very good one. We don't need anything. Or I like this one word, or I like this sentence, or I like this paragraph, whatever. I also sent links to a grant finders tool that schools have the opportunity to see what grants are currently available through schoolsafety.gov. There were many of those grants that are closed. Many of them are open at different times where schools can take advantage and apply for specific grants. And then I also articulated the grant opportunities through our office, to the Office of Homeland Security. That runs from the first part of January and ends February 17th, that grant application process. The committee that reviews those grants that are submitted by K through 12s and also nonprofits have the opportunity to review the application and see what it is that school is applying for, whether it's key fobs, fencing, you know, secure access in a vestibule area that we like to refer to as a secondary access control measure. And they look at that and say, hey, this is really done well. This is really well written. But I also see they reached out to the South Dakota School Safety Center and had an assessment done. So they've gone above and beyond to make some recommendations that are also highlighted and noted in options for consideration by the School Safety Center. So they do take that into consideration as well. So we do have our Office of Homeland Security through grant funds that are awarded to the state, that each state gets. We have awarded a lot of money to schools over the years and will continue to do so. And we look forward to reviewing those applications when they come in. So, and I should say with that, when schools submit those applications to our office, they could receive all the money that they're requesting. They could receive a partial award, or they might not receive any award. So any one of those three options could occur, but if they lay it out right and there's a need, you know, they certainly will take that into great consideration.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Thank you. This is very well done. And we do appreciate all the work that you put in to do this. We look forward to actually making hopefully some of these changes that are really necessary. Is there any, one last question, is there any priority list that you see or that you put together that you see high need to do something fast first?
I always try to be careful with schools that I go into, recognizing that this is their school. They know their school better than I, even though I've laid out options for consideration. This is how I leave it with schools. I want them to take the opportunity to review the documentation that we provide. Have an opportunity to go through it with their team in the district and see for themselves what they think is a priority, but then certainly they can reach out to me and we'll help them with some of those priorities. I had one school that I thought did it really well. And I'm a former DCI agent. I retired as a DCI. I'm a former sportscaster. So I've never had an original thought in my life. Everything I've done and said has been done and said by somebody else. So I've copied this specific school principal. Brett, this is what we like. Tell me what you think of this. These are our must-dos. These are our should-dos. And these are our wanna-dos. And I like the way they did that. So when I talk to schools, that when they ask, I'm happy to help them with that. But as far as absolute glaring needs, there aren't, because your schools do a really good job of trying to address what I think are the most critical components of school safety in securing that facility and making sure that they have the opportunity to do that. So the needs that you see, or the wants that you see, or the shoulds that you see, are just that. They're options for consideration that I think you'll be able to look at based on your current resources and resources that you're able to obtain, make those determinations. And if you want our help, I'm right here. So.
That's really good to hear. Thank you.
So I would say two things. One, in closing, there always are grants out there.
Yeah.
The question is whose plate writing those grants falls on. Does it fall on the principal's plate? Does it fall on federal programs plate? Many districts have also gone to hiring a grant writer. And the grant writers, like, part of their task is to write enough grants to earn their salary back into the district. We do not have that position, and that might be something that we would want to look at moving forward. The grants for the safety are included in many of the job descriptions that I found for safety coordinators for the district. That would just, if we would want to have a conversation and go that way. I'm by no means saying that that is a absolute requirement, but it is something to consider that many districts do have. Oftentimes they're retired law enforcement. I don't know that we could lure Mr. Garland away from the state, but I know that, many former SROs in our community have retired from the Pennington County Sheriff's Office or from the Rapid City PD and are doing safety and security for monuments, safety and security for Black Hills Power. Many of the job descriptions that I did research on literally said they wanted them to have law enforcement experience, SWAT team experience, a good relationship with local law enforcement. And then to bring it around full circle at the end, we are where we are because of what happened in 1991. And everything that had happened since then, but we were ahead of the game. And oftentimes Rapid City Area Schools is ahead of the game on things. We don't always get the credit in curriculum, in instruction, but we were doing this, making changes before the rest of the nation even realized there was an issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll move on to other. Does anybody have an other? Not tonight. All right, I need a motion to adjourn. Deb,
Second.
Michael, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, thank you so much. I
you.
appreciate that.